This program is supported by Protect Plus Gold, a broad-spectrum disinfectant, kills 99.9% of disease-causing germs and works in 10 minutes.
Hello, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching Eagle News International. Good evening to you, CJ.
Good evening, Alma, and good evening to everyone joining the broadcast. Here are the top headlines tonight.
The Association of Southeast Asian Nations and China have agreed to exercise restraint in the disputed South China Sea and to avoid activities that would provoke tensions in the region.
The Philippine Embassy in Myanmar has been on alert since the military takeover that led to the arrest of the country's key leaders, including Democratic icon Aung San Suu Kyi. Philippine Ambassador to Myanmar, His Excellency Eduardo Capunan Jr., gives us an update on the situation there.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau denounced the killing of 4 Muslim family members run down by the driver of a pickup truck as a hate-driven terrorist attack, as he urged the nation to stand up against intolerance.
And Vietnam plans to postpone this year's Southeast Asian Games as the country grapples with a new virus outbreak.
First, here in the country, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and China have agreed to exercise restraint in the disputed South China Sea and to avoid activities that would provoke tensions in the region. The commitment was made during the special ASEAN-China Foreign Ministers meeting in Chongqing, China on June 7. Take a look. Now, according to the joint statement of Foreign Affairs Secretary Teodoro Locsin Jr. and Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who co-chaired the meeting, both ASEAN and China will enhance and promote maritime security, uphold the freedom of navigation in and overflight above the South China Sea, and exercise self-restraint in the conduct of activities that would complicate or escalate disputes and affect peace and stability. Both parties also agreed to pursue peaceful resolution of disputes in accordance with international law, including the 1982 UNCLOS. Several littoral states, including China, the Philippines, Brunei, Vietnam, and Malaysia, have overlapping claims in the South China Sea. Now, just this May, the Philippines protested the incessant deployment, prolonged presence, and illegal activities of Chinese maritime assets and fishing vessels in the vicinity of the Pagasa Islands, demanding that China withdraw these vessels through a note verbal.
Here in the Philippines now, Malacanang said members of the Communist Party of the Philippines, or CPP, armed wing, the New People's Army, or the NPA, must be punished for planting anti-personnel mines in Masbate. In a virtual press conference, presidential spokesperson Harry Roque said NPA rebels are guilty of committing an international crime due to the use of landmines. Take a look.
Alam niyo po yung paggamit ng landmines is an international crime. Hindi lang po yung krimen dito sa Pilipinas. That is a crime against humanity. It is a war crimes. Pinagbabawal po yan ng Ottawa Convention, no? Dahil ang landmines po linalabag yung prinsipyo ng distinction sa international humanitarian law, dahil kahit sinong paa po ay po pwede mag-trigger ng pagsabog yan, hindi lang ng paa ng mandirigma. So yan po isang international crime at importante na mahuli, malitis, maparusahan ang mga tao ng NPA na patuloy pong gumagamit ng landmines. Ulitin ko po, that's an international crime, a crime against the international community. That is the worst crime that anyone can commit, and the NPA is guilty of it.
2 people, including a young football player of the Far Eastern University, were killed while a minor was wounded in an APM blast believed to have been planted by NPA guerrillas in Anas village in Masbate City. Killed in the incident were FEU varsity player Keith Absalon, 21 years old, and his cousin Nolven Absalon, 40 years old. Nolven's son, 16-year-old Crispin Daniel, sustained injuries. The victims were riding on a bicycle when a suspected APM detonated in Purok 4 in Anas village in Masbate City. Aside from this unprovoked attack against the Absalons, Lieutenant General Antonio Parlade Jr., Armed Forces of the Philippines Southern Luzon Command Chief, said communist terrorists also torched a Globe Telecom cell tower on the same day and rigged a landmine in a nearby light post at around 3 a.m. in Barangay Humapon, Legazpi City, Albay, to maim and kill responding government security troops.
In other news, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau denounced the killing of 4 Muslim family members run down by a driver of a pickup truck as a hate-driven terrorist attack, and he urged the nation to stand up against intolerance. The victims, a husband and wife, their teenage daughter, and the child's grandmother, were killed Sunday when the truck mounted a curb and struck them in the city of London in Canada's central Ontario province. The couple's 9-year-old son, orphaned in what police said was a planned attack targeting a Muslim family, was recovering in hospital from serious injuries. Take a look.
It happened on Sunday in London. This act of terrorism and Islamophobia is sickening. It is heartbreaking. It's hard to find words that are enough. What can be said when yet another family has had their loved ones ripped away, when a child is in hospital, when a community is in mourning? So all I can say is this: to everyone who is grieving, who is angry, who is afraid, your neighbors stand with you. Your community stands with you. We will not let hate divide us.
Now, the suspect, identified as 20-year-old Nathaniel Veltman, was arrested at a mall 7 kilometers away, according to Detective Superintendent Paul Waite. Veltman has been charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Party leaders in the House of Commons condemned the violence as an act of Islamophobia, a growing problem in a country long known for its tolerance. The episode brought back painful memories of the Quebec mosque attack in January of 2017 and of a driving rampage in Toronto that killed 10 people in April of 2018, among other attacks.
Staying in Canada, the latest attack also came at a sensitive time for the authorities on the heels of the shocking discovery of the remains of 215 Indigenous children on the grounds of a Catholic school in British Columbia they had been forced to attend as part of a since-ended national effort at assimilation. It is a lifetime since she left, but Evelyn Camille's throat tightens as she returns to her old Indigenous boarding school in Western Canada to honor the 215 bodies or 215 pupils whose bodies were discovered in a mass grave. As a girl in the 1940s, Evelyn Camille, a member of the Kamloops Sequamapunk tribe in Canada, was forced to attend the Kamloops Indian Residential School, where the remains of 215 children were found last month. Take a look.
I went here 10 years when, I think when I was about 7 or 8 years old, they come and took us in the big cattle trucks, and they picked us up from our reserves and brought us here. Many children ran away from here. Many of them did not make it home. Many drowned in this river, tried to swim across. Those children are not accounted for. This discovery here sort of brings light to how we were treated. That's only part of it. That is how we were treated. Many of the children from here died. That was a shock to our system. It opened up the wounds again. So hard to know that these are babies that are there and that hurts more. There's never any real closure. The pain is too deep in our hearts, in our minds, in our bodies. The pain is too deep. Any little thing will open up those wounds again. But we learn to move on.
1,000 Indian, Inuit, and Metis children in total were enrolled in these residential schools where students were physically and sexually abused by headmasters and teachers who stripped them of their culture and language. At least 4,100 students died from disease, malnutrition, or neglect, according to a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that in 2015 called it cultural genocide. Today, those experiences are blamed for a high incidence of poverty, alcoholism, and domestic violence, as well as high suicide rates in Indigenous communities. Canada has been convulsed by the discovery of the remains in Kamloops, especially as there were only 50 deaths officially on record here.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reiterated and called on Pope Francis to issue a formal apology for the role the Catholic Church played in Canada's residential school system days after the remains of 215 children were located at what once was the country's largest such school. Take a look.
As a Catholic, I am deeply disappointed by the position that the Catholic Church has taken now and over the past many years. When I went to the Vatican a number of years ago, I directly asked His Holiness Pope Francis to move forward on apologizing, making these records available. I know that many people will have seen the Pope's comments from a few days ago about the residential school system in Canada. And we have all heard that what communities and families want and need is an apology. Yesterday, I spoke with Archbishop Richard Gagnon of Winnipeg, who's also the president of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, as well as Bishop Joseph Nguyen from the Roman Catholic Diocese of Kamloops. We discussed the importance of the Church working with Indigenous communities to address the harm and intergenerational trauma caused by residential schools in Canada. Thousands of Catholics are speaking up to say that the Church must apologize. Canadians hear you.
For the Roman Catholic Church to continue not to apologize, I think will be a crime. They have to apologize. I'm talking about the Pope now. But nobody ever really expected that this could happen in Canada, that institutions, especially church ones, could deceitfully bury little ones and leave them in unmarked graves. And so they never got to go home, and some of the parents never got to know what happened.
Now, Pope Francis expressed sorrow Sunday for the gruesome discovery of the mass grave in Canada containing the remains of hundreds of Indigenous children. Although Francis expressed sorrow on Sunday, he never explicitly apologized for the Church's role in the forced re-education of more than 150,000 children who were taken from their homes over a period of 150 years during the 19th and 20th centuries. Many of the children were forced to become Catholics, were forbidden from speaking their native languages, and were often abused. In 2015, a national commission condemned the treatment as cultural genocide. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Friday he was deeply disappointed that the Catholic Church had not offered a formal apology for its role in the church-run boarding schools.
In other news, French President Emmanuel Macron was slapped in the face while greeting a crowd in southeast France on Tuesday in a shock incident he shrugged off as isolated, but which drew widespread condemnation in a tense political climate. Take a look.
Colère et il faut faire attention.
Non, il y a de la bêtise. Il y a de la bêtise. Et quand la bêtise s'allie à la violence, elle est inacceptable. C'est autre chose. Faut pas la confondre. La colère, moi je l'entends. La colère, démocratiquement, elle s'exprime. Vous savez, je vais toujours au contact. À portée d'engueulade, je le dis. Et j'y tiens. Les gens m'expriment leur colère, parfois leur désarroi. Je suis toujours là. Parfois j'ai la réponse, d'autres fois je ne l'ai pas. J'essaie de la bâtir. Parfois je me trompe, d'autres fois j'y arrive. Ça, c'est la colère légitime. Et on sera toujours là pour y répondre. La bêtise et la violence, non. Pas en démocratie.
Video footage on social media shows a Macron shaking hands with voters when a man in a green t-shirt takes hold of his forearm and slaps him. Macron's bodyguards quickly intervened and 2 people were detained after the incident. 2 28-year-old men living in the region are being questioned, said local prosecutor Alex Pirin. But at this stage, he said, of questioning, their motives remain unknown. The incident took place in a tense and increasingly polarized political climate in France, weeks ahead of regional elections and less than a year before presidential polls. In an interview with the Dauphiné Libéré newspaper, Macron insisted he was unafraid and would continue to meet people in this way.
To Bolivia now, where politicians Henry Montero and Antonio Gabriel Colque traded kicks and punches during a public session in Congress in La Paz after receiving a ministerial report on the arrest of former right-wing President Janine Áñez. Take a look. And the news continues here on Eagle News. CJ and I will be back right after this break.
Protect yourself and loved ones. Use Protect Plus Gold, a broad-spectrum disinfectant that kills 500 strains of bacteria, fungi, and viruses such as coronavirus and other disease-causing microorganisms. Also potent against viruses in pets. It kills 99.9% of disease-causing germs and works in 10 minutes. Dissolve 1 teaspoon in 1 liter of water. Apply on areas for disinfection or use it for misting. Protect Plus Gold.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon, gabay natin ang MTRCB ratings sa matalino at responsableng panonood. Sa tamang pagsunod sa MTRCB ratings, ginagawa nating ligtas at makabuluhan ang panonood ng bawat miyembro ng pamilyang Pilipino. Lumipas man ang panahon, hanggang may pamilyang Pilipino, andyan ang MTRCB.
Welcome back to the news. In the next few days, the British Prime Minister must decide whether to fully reopen society as planned, even as a new and highly infectious coronavirus variant surges. Let's hear more from Ariane Celestino of our ABC UK Bureau. Ariane.
Hi, CJ. Here is my update in the United Kingdom. The Delta variant of the coronavirus is estimated to be 40% more transmissible than the Alpha variant that caused the last wave of infections in the UK, Britain's health minister said Sunday. But people who have received 2 doses of vaccine should be equally protected against either variant, he added. The Delta variant, also known as the Indian variant, is now the dominant strain in the UK, according to Public Health England figures. It was the Alpha variant, previously known as the Kent variant, that forced the UK into lockdown in January. Health Secretary Mark Hancock said the 40% figure came from the government body of scientific advisors, SAGE. Concerns are mounting over whether the emergence of the Delta variant threatens the government's provisional June 21 deadline for lifting various restrictions. Hancock acknowledged that the Delta variant does make the calculation more difficult for June 21. He told the BBC on Sunday, "We'll look at the data for another week and then make a judgment," stressing that the government was absolutely open to delaying the lifting of restrictions. The minister nevertheless stressed that those who have had 2 doses of vaccine should be protected against illness from the Delta variant. Public Health England said last month that research showed double vaccination was similarly effective against both the Kent and Delta variants. The UK has so far given more than 27 million people 2 doses, more than 50% of adults, while more than 40 million have had 1 dose. Hancock said the government was taking clinical advice on whether to extend the vaccination program to children over 12, who are believed to be playing a major role in spreading the virus. But this would not be mandatory, he added. CJ?
Well, Arian, speaking of children, can you tell us the current situation there in schools? For example, are there testing programs available for students, especially, you just mentioned there's a growing concern of regarding the Delta variant spreading there?
Well, CJ, according to BBC, since January, more than 50 million rapid COVID tests have been taken by students in England. The Department of Education reported only around 1% of state school students in England have been absent for COVID-related reasons every day since the middle of April. Also, since March, secondary students have been asked to carry out twice weekly testing routines, which helped identify and isolate asymptomatic cases. This major testing program was praised by Education Secretary Gavin Williamson, but because of concerns of the spread of the Delta variant, the school communities across England are asked to take COVID tests after returning from school break. Even family members are encouraged to also get tested. There are already pop-up vaccination centers and testing sites accessible to local residents. Hopefully, all this will help combat the spread of the new variant. Back to you, CJ.
Well, thank you so much, Arian, for your report. I know everyone there is just excited to get back to the normal routine, especially with a date given by or set by the government there. But please do take care and update us if there are more new happenings there in the UK.
Thank you for having me. Reporting from the United Kingdom, I am Arian Celestino. We'll live in interesting times.
The U.S. government has lowered its travel alert for the Philippines from level 4 to 3. In an advisory posted on June 8, the U.S. State Department advised Americans to still reconsider travel to the country due to high level of coronavirus disease. Under level 3, U.S. citizens are encouraged to get fully vaccinated before travel, while those unvaccinated travelers were told to avoid non-essential travel. Last April, Americans were advised against all travel to the Philippines after the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention raised to level 4, very high, its COVID-19 advisory for the country, the highest of its pandemic warnings. America's do not travel notice, meanwhile, remains in place in Marawi City and the Sulu Archipelago, including the southern Sulu Sea, due to crime, terrorism, civil unrest, and kidnapping. A reconsidered travel warning is also hoisted in other parts of Mindanao. The Philippine government maintains a state of emergency and greater police presence in the Cotabato City area and in the Maguindanao, North Cotabato, and Sultan Kudarat provinces, that according to the State Department's statement. Terrorists and armed groups continue to conduct kidnappings, bombings, and other attacks targeting U.S. citizens, foreigners, civilians, local government institutions, and security forces, it added.
The Philippines' total number of recovered COVID-19 cases has reached 1,210,027, with 7,854 more recoveries reported on Wednesday. In its latest case bulletin, the Department of Health noted that recoveries account for 94.1% of the country's total case or COVID-19 count, which has reached 1,286,217 since the start of the pandemic last year. The agency also reported 5,462 new cases, bringing the total number of active cases to 54,000. About 92.6% of these active cases are mild, 3% are asymptomatic, 1.4% are critical, 1.8% are severe, and 1.22% are moderate. Some 126 new deaths were also reported, pushing the country's total number of COVID-19 fatalities to 22,190, or 1.73% of the total cases. According to the Department of Health data on June 7, about 12.6% of 39,788 who were tested turned out positive for COVID-19.
The European Parliament has given the green light to the European COVID digital certificate, according to results announced Wednesday morning. The European Commission said that more than 1 million Europeans have already received the new EU COVID health certificate being rolled out to unlock travel within the bloc. The certificate, showing the bearer's immunity to COVID-19 either through vaccination or previous infection or their negative test status, is to be used for intra-EU travel from July 1, obviating the need for quarantine or further testing for travelers. But the Commission wants as many EU countries as possible to start earlier. As of Tuesday, 9 EU countries were already issuing the documents, including the sunny tourist destinations of Greece, Spain, and Croatia, as well as the bloc's major source of tourists, Germany. Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Denmark, Lithuania, and Poland were the others. The EU digital COVID certificate can be presented either in online form, on a smartphone, or, for example, printed out on paper. It features a QR code for verification, which border officials and venue staff can use to check against digital signatures stored securely in Luxembourg servers. Only minimal data of the bearer are included on the certificates to prevent identity skimming, and the EU legislation surrounding their use is due to expire after a year so that they don't become a fixture with potential Big Brother uses in the future.
In other news, Vietnam plans to postpone this year's Southeast Asian Games as the country grapples with a new virus outbreak. The regional Olympics are due to be held in Hanoi and 11 other locations, some of them at the epicenter of the fresh COVID-19 wave from November 21 to December 2. But Vietnam reportedly wants to move the 31st SEA Games to next year. The Vietnam Olympics Committee, the host for the SEA Games 31, has sent a letter to countries informing them of its proposal to postpone SEA Games 31 to July 2022 due to the complicated situation of the COVID-19 pandemic, according to Papluat Online. The SEA Games Council, based in Bangkok, is already meeting before a decision can be made.
Meanwhile, people in France enjoyed indoor dining and gyms for the first time in months today as the country relaxed coronavirus rules that will also see a curfew push to 11 p.m. as COVID cases ease and vaccines pick up. Rules for travelers from within the EU were also eased, while cultural venues relaxed their measures in line with France's phased reopening for the summer months. The overnight curfew will now start later at 11 p.m. instead of 9 p.m. before being dropped entirely on June 30 if all goes to plan. The new measures also mean that spectators will be able to enjoy night sessions for the final stages of the French Open tennis in Paris after previously being slung out at 9 p.m. Tables of up to 6 will be permitted at cafes and restaurants, while gyms can also reopen for clients indoors. Travel to France will also be easier from Wednesday, with borders fully open to EU residents. Visitors from the EU will not have to provide a negative antigen or PCR test if they've had a full course of one of the 4 vaccines authorized by the bloc, which are Pfizer-BioNTech, Oxford, AstraZeneca, Moderna, or Johnson & Johnson. Travel from other zones, including the U.S. and Britain, are subject to tighter restrictions, but visitors will no longer have to prove a compelling reason for a visit, so long as they are fully vaccinated.
Now, people walking through certain areas in Brussels are no longer required to wear face masks as Belgium further relaxes its COVID-19 restrictions. Belgium will also relax restrictions allowing cafes and restaurants to serve indoors. Prime Minister Alexander De Croo announced longer operating hours for businesses and easing of restrictions on sports venues and cinemas. European nations are ramping up vaccinations as they try to strike a balance between public health and reviving sectors such as tourism that were devastated by pandemic travel restrictions.
In Moscow, however, things are looking more worrying, with the virus surging as officials struggle to persuade the public to get vaccinated. Russia today reported a spike in the number of infections as officials struggle to encourage Russians to get vaccinated. A government tally reported 10,407 new coronavirus infections across the country, the highest since March 14. Moscow, the worst-hit city in Russia, also saw a surge in new infections, registering the highest number of daily cases since January 16. Russia has been among the countries hardest hit by the coronavirus pandemic, with the 6th highest number of cases in the world. Russia imposed a strict lockdown when the pandemic first swept across the country last spring. But authorities lifted most measures within several months, opting to protect the struggling economy and pinning their hopes on curbing the outbreak with vaccines. Officials have registered 4 homegrown vaccines: the Sputnik V, its single-dose version Sputnik Light, Epiva Corona, and Covivac, while Russia's domestic vaccination campaign started in early December ahead of most countries. So far, around 18 million Russians, or 12% of the population, has received at least 1 dose of a vaccine. President Vladimir Putin has repeatedly called on Russians to get immunized as authorities struggle to ramp up vaccination efforts.
Meanwhile, cars line up outside a shopping mall in India's capital, New Delhi, where a drive-through clinic has been set up to administer COVID-19 vaccines. Demand is far outstripping supplies for jabs in India, with only 3.5% of the population fully vaccinated. Take a look.
सेकेंड डोज 84 डेज के बाद लगना है दोनों को, ठीक है। 84 डेज बाद इसमें रेडनेस स्वेलिंग आएगा, तो ऐसे अप्लाई करना है।
We're vaccinating a little more than we were about 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago. We've crossed 3 million per day. Ideally, we should have been looking at numbers like 40% coverage, 50% coverage of vaccines. And that's a point where we could think of opening up more fully. But as I said, there is a tension between economic requirements of having to open up, people having been out of work for a long time, and the fact that the economy has to function so that people can be fed.
In other news, people living in Colorado's Weld County got a wild show from Mother Nature. Take a look. Now, this is when a large tornado ripped through fields and farmland, damaging homes and property on Monday. The National Weather Service said the tornado was rated an EF1 with maximum sustained winds of 99 miles per hour. The tornado traveled 6 miles and was on the ground for about 30 minutes. According to Weld County, 7 properties were damaged. 2 homes were destroyed, meaning more than half of the home was damaged. The estimated loss of the destroyed homes is $429,176. 3 other homes were damaged to the cost of $101,336. The Denver Channel said no injuries were reported. Michelle Van Hosen, who was born and raised at the farm that her grandparents started in 1949 before her parents took over in the 1980s, said she had never seen a tornado like Monday's. Weld County holds the record for the highest number of tornadoes in the United States.
Fueled by widespread COVID-19 vaccinations in advanced nations, the world economic recovery has picked up speed, but the upbeat outlook obscures a worrying picture in poor nations, the World Bank said yesterday. The global economy is now expected to grow 5.6% this year, 1.5 points faster than projected in January, the fastest post-recession bounce back in 80 years, according to the latest Global Economic Prospects report. Take a look.
Because they are still, we are expecting growth around 5.6% this year. How good this number is? When you look at all the global recessions and what happened after the global recessions, this is the best number we are seeing over 80 years. It is like the tale of 2 recoveries. It is the best of times for advanced economies, and probably it is the worst of times for emerging market and developing economies. And for low-income countries, growth number is going to be less than 3%. Those are the countries we need the growth most, and they are not growing at the levels they should grow. Growth is fast in advanced economies. Commodity prices are at record levels, but emerging market developing economies are still struggling because they are still dealing with a health crisis on the ground. Single most important risk is associated with distribution and deployment of vaccines, controlling the pandemic. If we don't control the health crisis, we cannot have a even recovery. We cannot have the type of strong recovery we would like to have. That's why it is critical for the global community to find the ways to improve the production of vaccines, distribution of vaccines, and deployment of vaccines.
Now, Myanmar has been in chaos and its economy paralyzed since the February putsch and a brutal military crackdown on dissent that has killed over 800, according to a local monitoring group. Earlier, we were able to talk to His Excellency Mr. Eduardo Kapunan Jr., the Philippine ambassador to Myanmar. Let's listen in.
For example, nung huli tayo mag-usap, there were just about 700 deaths all over Myanmar.
Yes.
Ang cause of death are gunshot wounds. Now it's reaching something like 800 plus. And of course, may bagong mga developments ngayon doon. We are starting to see explosive devices exploding in Yangon and in other states around Yangon. And so far, we have counted about 50 plus explosions. But one thing peculiar about these explosions is that nung ina-analyze namin yung mga videos ng explosion, ang usok ng putok is white. And you know, for a trained eye, I know for a fact that it is a low detonation process. Meaning, ang ginamit na explosive is not really high explosives. Para bang yung mga pulbura, black powder ng bibintador, alam mo yung firecrackers na pinalaki nila, yun ang pumuputok. It's mga improvised explosive. I have yet to see an explosion na itim mang usok, which we call full detonation. Pagka full ang itim mang usok. And what I peculiar about this is minimal ang casualties. Meaning, nagpapaputok sila and mostly attributed to those who are against the military government. Pero when they situate ng nasasaktan, minimal lang. Siguro wala nga siguro mga 10 ang nasaktan sa mga ganito. Walang masyadong deaths. Wala masyadong shrapnel ang mga explosive nila. Yun ang isang bago doon. May isa pang bagong nangyayari ngayon. The forces against the military government are starting to assassinate.
Oh.
Mga people whom they think are informers of the military regime. Like for example, sa mga townships nila, may designate ang military regime na parang parang mga township administrators. And if these township administrators have created damage against these people who are against the government, meron mga incidents doon ang mga na-assassinate ito, nasaksak, na ganon, nababaril. So there is this current development na ang opposition ng gobyerno is engaging in what I would call terrorist activities. No? Pero because of the small amount of casualties sa bomba nila, parang nababasa ko, parang announcement lang ito na, hey guys, we are still here. Buhay pa kami, hindi kami nawawala pa. Parang gano'n. Yun ang mga pagbabago ngayon na nangyayari.
But the Myanmar government classified this resistance government as terrorist.
Yes, they have classified. That's why they refuse to talk to these people. The military junta refuses to talk to these people because of their classification as terrorists. So nung in-announce ng military government na we are open to peace talks, they were referring to ethnic armed organizations. Not this one against the government. Kasi ethnic armed organizations, it is believed that they are only fighting for their own local interest.
Yes.
Not national interest. So, yun ang medyo mabigat na maramdaman na kahit na may problema sila sa political opposition, nagsisimula ng mag-gain ng strength, ayaw nila magpag-usap. And then the only way para ma-settle sa ito is kung ma-open yung window na mag-usap na ang dalawa, di ba? Kasi kung magpatayan lang yung nasa pagkakatugalit na yan, it will just heighten the anger, it will just heighten, the animosities. And hindi ko nakikitaan ng parang magkasundo sila. So, iyon ngayon po ang thrust ng ASEAN na pagpaupuin sila para mag-usap-usap.
Our Foreign Secretary, Theodore Locsin, is apparently supporting of course, democracy and the ousted civilian leader Aung San Suu Kyi, he was quite vocal about it. Is that the right approach in your view? And should the Philippines or ASEAN as a whole be doing more, do you think, to support the protests in the streets or to put an end to chaos there?
Actually, as of now, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Philippines, they're supporting the old government, the duly elected democratic government. The other members of ASEAN are still parang kinakapa pa nila ang sitwasyon. Which brings ASEAN to a very peculiar situation. Kasi ASEAN, hindi nag-decide kundi consensus, di ba?
Yes.
So, after the meeting of ASEAN last June, ASEAN came up with a 5-point consensus recommendation. And none of these 5 were active. Well, sa action ng Myanmar, because ang si Minong Lang yung general ng commanding general ng Myanmar attended the conference, and the perception was that nagkaroon ng consensus dun sa 5 points na yun. But pagbalik sa Myanmar ng nila, they said that we can only comply with the 5 points of ASEAN if the situation stabilizes.
Yes.
Now, it's really a question of how do you define stability? Diba? And stability vis-a-vis whom? When in fact they are closing their doors against, the anti-government faction.
Well, interesting insights there by His Excellency.
I guess we'll have you tomorrow when we have more time. Thank you for joining us.
Well, that's it for tonight's broadcast. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I am TJ Hero. Join us again tomorrow.
And at the end of the day, there remains so much more to be grateful for. I'm Alma Angeles, and we live in interesting times.
This program is supported by Protect Plus Gold, a broad-spectrum disinfectant, kills 99.9% of disease-causing germs and works in 10 minutes.